about things that we're dealing with as leaders in our community, because not everybody thinks like you do. They don't all think biblically. I mean, you look in the New Testament, they didn't have to deal with this. They had Jewish and Gentile issues. They had Jews and Samaritan issues, but they didn't have color issues. I mean, when you read that there were prophets and teachers gathered in Antioch, and you have Simeon called Niger, which is believed that that was from Nigeria. He came in from Africa. He would have been a black brother among them. Same way it would have been of Lucius of Cyrene, who would have been the same place of Simeon of Cyrene, would have been an African. It didn't mention, hey, we had some black brothers and some white brothers there in Acts 13. They said we had prophets and teachers. Come on. So there is a place. I'm not saying that we don't deal with what's here, but there is a place among us. It never becomes an issue, but we're aware of the issue. Are you with me? We're aware of the healing. We're aware of the need that's there. And that's why I believe it's called upon us, whites or Caucasians, for us to say we're hearing. We're listening. You're our brother. And yes, we don't like the protest, but that's a cry. That's a cry of wound that we have the answer for. Amen? So in that, I think it's interesting that last night I felt like, I don't know what you heard me say, but I felt like there's many other areas besides the two major issues that I believe facing America, but I believe the two major issues that the church is being called upon to address, and that is the sexually broken and the racial divide. I believe those are two areas that only the church has the answer. Nobody else has the answer for the dysphoria and the confusion on transgender and bisexual and those issues. No one else has the answer. Only the church has the answer. And we're going to be needing some help. I mentioned Gary Ingram last night, Gary and Melissa, the Lord willing. They would have been with us here this time. They were not able to. He was supposed to have spoke this morning because I really wanted our hearts to hear as he came out of the homosexual lifestyle, his wife out of the lesbian lifestyle, and they found each other and married and have two sons, and now a ministry called Love and Truth that help churches be that instrument in that community. And to see how someone comes in who has, and there's a tremendous, we're going to see the fruit of that, those who've transitioned to an opposite sex. Now, how are they coming back? Because there's a wound and a hurt, a lie, deception, and the church, I believe, will see a revolution and a healing among those who have suffered the plight of sin and deception and saying, I was lied to. And we have to be the ones who receive the hippies of our generation. So when Lonnie Frisbee said to Chuck Smith, those people out there in their free sex and lost in drugs and living in a van down by the river in the commune or whatever they were, some of y'all got that. Those are the people that are hungry for God. I believe in every season. So our theme this year is for such a time, engage. So I believe every time in seasons of life of the church, God opens our eyes to say, where can we minister? When I grew up in Altus, we had some African Americans in our community, but there was as much prejudice against the Hispanics in Altus as there were among the blacks. We have some of our Altus family here. Would you agree with that? That there's been that era. It was probably more subtle in some ways, but it was a devaluing of their imago Dei, the image of God, the equality of what God has done. So there's different capacities. And here in Claremore, as we've talked, and in Owasso, by the way, Owasso has twice the demographics as Claremore. We have 1.9 African Americans percent in Claremore. And y'all have 3% in Owasso. And we have 3% Hispanics now, and y'all have 6% over here in Owasso. So I'm glad we have a congregation in both places. Come on, right? God has done that intentionally, I believe, to bring these two cities as one in one church, in one place for the heart. One of the things I want us to do today in this morning session is just to unpackage what you thought was said last night and what you heard and what was in your heart, and maybe for us to talk a little bit about our journey. I'm very pleased and proud to have Terrell Murphy here with us in the morning session, and I'm going to introduce him in just a moment, but wave at us over here, brother, so they'll know who you are. This is a precious brother that he's us. His heart for the kingdom, longtime associate with Dennis Peacock, and I've met him through the International Coalition of Apostolic Leaders and the council there, but I just love his heart. The more I get acquainted with him, I told him, I don't care what he says, we need him here. It's not what you say, it's who you are, and we need men like that in our life. How many understand what I'm saying? You know, this is not a time necessarily. I know Dennis and he are going to say great things, but it's really who they are, isn't it? You get imparted to. And we need those connections. And we've been, Dennis first came here in 1989, and every time he's come, there's been that impartation, there's been that shift, and there's been that adding to. And so it is part of the fruit of that calling and that gifting. And so I feel like that's part of what this weekend is about. I want you to just, this week, I want you to just draw from that. Take notes and all those things, but be prepared that God shifts. There's a group of us that meet together once a year, and since COVID's interrupted us, in fact, we started bringing the meeting here in the fall, and we had 60, well, I guess it was 103 last time we met together. 35 came from Canada with Ken Gill, and Tony Fitzgerald brought a group, and we had some from up in Indiana with Dan Dyer, and we had all came together, just spiritual fathers and sons, and every time we'd get together, that group, I would get equipped. I would feel energized. I'd feel renewed. I'd feel like, okay, I'm on the right path. And I think this week is going to be that way for us. There's an adjustment, which, by the way, the Canadians are promising to come again in October, just so that you know. They've opened the gate now so they can travel, so they plan on bringing a group again to be that, because we need each other, don't we? We need those who have hearts of like faith that labor together and share together. So that's part of what this morning is about. But we want to take a moment, and I want to identify those three areas, what we mean by engage for the conference, and then Jonathan and Kendrick's going to come and kind of lead us in some dialogue in this first session. And then after a break, then our brother Terrell will come and begin to I've just asked him to share his story and unload his heart with us this morning, because I want to connect with him. But there are three areas last night that I felt like would help us define what we mean by being engaged. You might recall those. Number one is be interested in what God is interested in. It's so easy for us to have our own agenda, isn't it? I mean, we're all guilty of that. And sometimes when these calamities or crises come up, we think they interrupt our agenda. And I think sometimes we just need to say, wait a minute, my agenda needs to be interrupted. I need to see what God is interested in. And a lot of times where sin is rising up is where God is focusing. Have you noticed that? It's always in those areas. So where is the hurt in your city? Where is the hurt in the relationship where God has placed you in your community? And every community is different. Our demographics here are totally different. I know our family from South Florida are going, what are you guys talking about? We have so much diversity of ethnos groups in our area. You can't go anywhere without that. It's already engaged in us, because so every demographic is different. I can't expect a congregation in some cities to have 20% of the minorities in their congregation. That would be a multi-ethnic. We're not pushing for multi-ethnic. We're pushing for reconciliation. Reconciliation is what God does in your heart. Multi-ethnic is what God blesses you with. And I know that if it wasn't for God's providential, we wouldn't be started on that journey. If it wasn't for 10 or 12 years ago that Kendrick and I got connected, that God sent him one Sunday morning as a young pastor, and it's his story. I don't want to tell his story, but to go down to Destiny Life, didn't know why he was there. Probably felt like the only African-American sitting in the congregation. He wasn't, but he probably felt that way, sitting in the back. And God told him to connect. And we've been walking this out now for 10 or 12 years, not knowing that our two congregations would merge last year. We thought sometime they would, but not how it did. And it was so powerful. That has done something that we could not have done. And then, God used you, Derek, and others right over here in Claremore about the time of the 2020, wasn't it? During that time. And I sat down with Derek and his family, and I said, hey, just to warn you, the Owasso campus is pure white. At that time, it was. Come on. It was pure white. And I said, you can either be a token or a pioneer, but we need a pioneer. And he said, I'm good with being a pioneer. I said, okay, you'll make it then. You'll make it. And I believe everyone that's come in is of that heart, a pioneer spirit. But you understand what I'm saying. God does that. You can't make that happen. Because what we're talking about are mature believers that God says, I'm going to connect you. And consequently, others now are connected at the same level, in the same depth. So, but first of all, you got to be interested. If I'm not interested in what God is interested in, how many know God's not in a hurry? And Terrell and I were just talking. Sometimes David doesn't get to build a house. Right? Sometimes it's the sons that get to build the house. It's been my wife and I's dream for 40 years. But you can't do it unless God gives you those people that can do it. Does that make sense? But you got to have an interest in what God's interested in. Secondly, we said to engage means to be invested. You remember that? We talked about being invested. It's going to cost, maybe. Misunderstandings. I think one of the things we have in this area, I was so blessed. I remember selling books door to door. My first summer was in Michigan, and we knocked on 100 doors a day and gave 30 demonstrations of books a day and got told no, all of those but one or two. And you learn a lot about yourself and during that time. And your second year, you got told less, and you made more money. And third and fourth year, you did really well, So the first year I sold in Michigan, and I, from Oklahoma, had never been among that many biracial marriages. And it was a real blessing to me. I remember going into a lot of homes where blacks and whites were married together. And I remember that doing something in me. Because that has been an issue in some people's hearts. Said, okay, I'm okay with everything else but that. I remember when Luna from Haiti came, and she's probably translating right now. Jerry back there is translating French or Spanish, and Luna's translating French right now. When she first came, and her and Greg Coleman from Claremore, Caucasian, got married, and it was put in the paper in Claremore. As far as I know, historically, that was the first publicly in the paper. And I remember a holy, godly saint among us came to me privately and said, I'm so concerned about this because of the children. And I said, you're not concerned about the children. But we already died on this hill, and it's settled. I don't know what year that was they got married, but it's settled. And that sweet person stayed sweet and shifted and changed. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes a cost. But their heart was sweet. Their heart was teachable. And they shifted and became a great support and a great love and a great of that couple. Isn't that amazing? So you have to have investment. I think if we have an interest in what God has, an investment in what God has, whatever that may be, whether you're reaching those caught up in the lifestyle of homosexuality and being able to see that. We had a grandfather that came in one day in this congregation, and he was so angry because his son had just come out as gay. And I happened to know his past, his multiple marriages, his multiple affairs before he really got free. So I said to him, have you judged your grandson's sin, sexual sin, worse than your own? And he began to weep to where he couldn't stand up. And he said, I didn't see it. You can't forgive until you see your own depravity. That's not affirming that. You understand? There's a difference between the compassion of God that brings a transformation, but we can't reach them if we don't see that from that perspective. So he said, I'm going home with a whole different perspective for my grandson. And that makes the difference in every one of these areas. And I believe the gospel transforms. Sitting in this auditorium a number of years ago was a lesbian couple. They came for about 6 months. And they sat in this auditorium. Finally, they wanted to work with the youth. And the youth pastor said, would you meet with Glenn? So I sat down with them, and I did not talk anything about lesbianism. I said, tell me about your spiritual journey. And I took them to the evangelism diagram. We walked through that. Which one are you? One of them said, I've been running from God, but I'm ready to turn around. The other one said, I've already done all that with my grandma. Her heart was hardened. The other one was tender. I said, well, if you're ready to do that, I'll pray with you. Walked them down the hall to the Christianity 101. And I told the ladies secretly, I don't know what's going to happen in this group, but these two ladies here need discipleship. They walked through the discipleship. I think went to encounter retreat. I'm not for sure. They go to encounter retreat. And one Sunday I'm preaching here and came up at the end right here at this altar. One of them did and said, you preached last week about your original intent. I wasn't talking about sexual orientation or anything. I said, you preached about original intent. I'm going back to my original intent. I've left my partner. My two sons have our own apartment. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. It's not, you got to have a discipleship process. Because everybody comes in the door, this building's not the church. They're not in the church. I said they're not in the church. Just because they come in this building, they're not in the church. You got to be born in the church. You got to be transformed by the gospel, right? There's got to be a conversion. So I know that there's a wisdom on how to walk in these areas of reaching. And that's really what we mean about being involved, right? You have to be interested in what God's interested in, be invested in what He's invested in, and being involved, which takes the gospel, doesn't it? So Kendrick, you and Jonathan want to come up here and take this and going from here.
Has this been good or what? Man, Glenn just said something that I want to allude to as we transition into just some dialogue. He said reconciliation is what God does in the heart, and multi-ethnic is what God blesses us with. That's such a key. It's such a nugget. And just thinking about, our journey. Elizabeth and I have been in Claremore for 13 years, and it took us 10 years to learn why. And it goes back to that statement of reconciliation is what happens in the heart. We did not know why we were in Claremore until we started to hear the history. And we took on African-American Baptist work. And then throughout the years, we've seen it grow into this multi-ethnic expression, which would be the first multi-ethnic congregation in the city of Claremore. But we could never give an explanation to how we did it. There was no strategy. It was by grace, but it was as we were learning the history, we began to recognize that we really were the fruit of the years of labor. The knocking on doors birthed fruit that wasn't evident in that moment. Glenn alluded to the reconciliation between Mount Zion. Real Life Church was birthed out of Mount Zion. That moment may have not seemed significant, but I really do believe that there was a birthing in those moments that called Elizabeth and I into this region, and so we've never been able to give an explanation for Real Life, because I really do believe that it's generational fruit, and that we were just experiencing the fruit. But with this theme of engage, we begin to realize in this conference that we need to have space for dialogue. This theme calls for more than church services and sermons. It really does call for dialogue. It calls for conversation. And it calls for us to sit around round tables. And I believe now more than ever, we need a fresh revelation of what it looks like for the body of Christ to be engaged in the culture of our generation. We need to hear from the Lord. We need wisdom, and we need a fresh picture, because we are in a culture that we can't read about in Scripture, right? There's no exact model or blueprint for what we're looking at and what we're facing, and it's going to come out of Revelation. And I believe that the two major points that Glenn is alluding to, of racial healing and the sexually broken, that is not a strategy, right? That's revelation. We feel like that's a download from the Lord of Him bringing revelation to the church, saying, here's where I'm calling you to engage. And we steward that by having conversations and leaning into it and growing into it. But we need to talk about it, because this has always been an interesting journey for the body of Christ, that there's this dichotomy of you are in the world but not of the world. But yet He's entrusted to us this message of reconciliation for the world. You see in James where he says, what is pure religion? To look after the orphans and the widows, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. It's like I'm giving you responsibility to engage and simultaneously to remain consecrated. And the church has struggled with that tension. But I'm willing to lean into that tension to say, Lord, what does this look like? I don't want to hide away in the four walls of the church in consecration and miss your purpose. And I don't want to miss consecration invading Hollywood. What does it really look like? And so we want to have this conversation, this dialogue, to just lean into this, because there's been generations, and Glenn might be able to help bring some insight to the generational shifts, that there was a time where it was remove all of the TVs and turn away from Hollywood, right? Do we separate? Do we hate Hollywood, or do we invade it? We need to know. We need to know these answers. Do we shun music, or do we invade music? This has been a long journey for the church, but I believe that we are in a time and in a generation where the Lord is going to bring supernatural wisdom, supernatural strategy. We can feel the shifting. And so we just wanted to have open dialogue and conversation. And by the way, if you go over to that email, we don't have a lot of time, but if you have questions throughout this time, we want you to email those. And email those to Sterling Ray at dlc.com or dlc.tv. And she's going to be able to cipher through those. Maybe we'll be able to engage in some of those right here in the next few minutes. But even if not, we want this to be an ongoing conversation amongst us as a movement, as a people, and as a network. So now and later, send questions or even comments, and we would love to go through it. But here I want to pose the first question of dialogue for us to engage in and direct it towards Glenn. But just talking about this tension spot, this separation from culture versus engaging culture. The question is, from a biblical perspective, what is the relationship between the body of Christ in a generation and the culture of that generation? Is the church called to engage the culture of their generation? And if so, to what degree?
You alluded to the fear that's there, to be separated from and to be engaged with that tension. And I think, when you used the idea about when we preached against TVs, now we should preach against them. Then they were okay. We're always late, right?
Then they were okay. Right now, we ought to be preaching against them. So, but it's the heart. Right now, it's the AI. You'll hear people preach against AI probably, and then you got a group of people learning. Okay, we need to invade AI. I mean, the church is always kind of starting off with that fearful thing, and also separation between, and we know better than that here, of course, but the secular and the sacred, and that there is no secular. And so to eliminate that is huge. It's only kingdom and not kingdom. So that opens up the door, whether it's in business or whether it's in education or whether it's in government, whatever it is, you just can't do it by that system. There is what you might call a Babylon system. There is a man's way of governing. It is a whole different concept. So you can go in and be overtaken by the spirit of that real quick. I mean, we go in, we're going to take over politically. Are you? You can get in the fight, can't you? And you get riled up, and you can be, rather than, wait a minute, yes, I need to be involved. Yes, we need Christians in that place, but we got to take it from a humble, prayerful place. And I'm just going to speak for our governor. When I found out he sold books door to door, I thought, he's my man right there, because you can't sell books door to door for 4 summers, and I'm not like you, because that's what we did. I worked my way through college, so I knew he was the real deal. But I knew he came out of Woodlake Assembly of God. And I knew he went to his pastor and prayed with his pastor before he ever decided he was going to run for office. And I know right now he's got prayer meetings going on. I know he's the real deal. Now, out here in the world, you're going to hear everything. So we can't go in and change the world's opinion, but we can be involved as believers. But if you're not careful, you get involved in politics, you get the spirit of it. You get the spirit of that. And I'm telling you, there's demons. There's big demons. I know when Amy ran for Senate in 2006, we found some big demons. I'm serious. We're up sometimes all night long praying. It was a force coming on a Senate race here in Oklahoma from back east and from up north. It was terrible. I've never experienced anything like that. There are demons that are associated with that. There's principalities that are associated with it. That's why the church has to be involved. But how we get involved, right now with the racial issues, there's principalities involved with this. There's principalities. And if we get caught up in that spirit of the world, we won't know how to do it, but we come from the cross. We come from the blood of Jesus. We come from our perspective of the kingdom. It opens up quickly. And so I think the real issue, as you would agree, it's not whether or not we are to be involved, it's how we're involved and the spirit of which we're involved, and say, okay, God, what is right? Because I grew up without a TV. And looking back on it, it's the greatest thing ever happened to me. I didn't see a movie until I saw The Cross and Switchblade or 10 Commandments with Tommy. I went to 10 Commandments with Tommy when I was 18 years old. But that was good for me. I mean, I look back on it, that was good. There was something really healing about it. We learned to play. We learned to do a whole lot of things. I didn't have all the things. So, yeah, I'm tender about those, even though people may have the wrong attitude. I'm tender toward those. But the real deal is the heart. The real deal is the approach we take. So,
I think what you said last night, Glenn, about the brother that went into Angola prison was a fantastic strategy. I think his one-liner was, I want to go into this prison and not allow the prison to get into me. And I think that is profound. I mean, to me, that is the secret sauce, if you will, of engaging culture through a Christian and biblical view. I mean, even and this is just Jonathan's opinion, but I think one of the reasons why these two issues that we're talking about are such hot button issues in our culture, and there's so much out there that would be anti-Christ and anti-gospel, is, as a whole, certainly there's demonic activity there, but as a whole, the church has not done a good job of really addressing these issues. We've kind of left it, we've created a vacuum and left it to that rather than really engaging in it. And even the 7 mountains teaching, if you will, that probably most of us would embrace in principle in regards to, if you don't know the 7 mountains, it's the 7 mountains or pillars of culture and invading those areas of culture. But even that, the nuance in that at times can be, we're going to get to the top of this mountain and just, from the top down, force everybody to capitulate to what, in these areas, rather than through the gospel, service, humility, caring for people, truly, invading that space like yeast, so that it is affecting the bread in a major way. But I'm not just coming in like a hammer. So I think that one-liner really stuck out to me. I think that's awesome thought. I want to go into this prison and not allow the prison to get into me. And just that one, I'm such a simplistic guy in that area. If I can grab hold of something like that, that's a great front door to every action. You find yourself angry at an inmate. Okay, how am I gonna respond to that? Am I gonna respond out of the Christ in me or out of my own flesh? And I think even in these two issues for my own personal journey, it's triggering for me in the sense that the areas that Jonathan's flesh really wants to hop out are the key areas in some of these. Like, for example, to be misunderstood. You want to get Jonathan's flesh going fast? Accuse me of something I didn't do. I'm about to, So like when you're walking in some of these things and you're putting whole people groups into corners, it causes your flesh to come up. But that's where I think there has to be a real deep humility, and where the gospel really is the only answer. It has to go through the cross. And then I think a key too is it starts with a heart change, but sometimes as Caucasians, we stop there. Well, it's just our heart. Well, it's got to start with our heart, but if my heart's really shifted, then there is going to be an external manifestation of that in behavior and thought and words, and so I think that's a key.
And we really don't know our heart until we engage.
That's true.
Like you don't know your heart until
Absolutely.
you engage these spaces, and these spaces expose our hearts, and the Lord uses that exposure to take us on this healing journey, because we have a tendency to want to perfect our hearts before we engage, and it's going to be too late. We can't. We have to jump in and trust that the Holy Spirit is going to work. But you alluded to something that, where the church is silent, there's always a vacuum for deception. And the longer we remain silent, the stronger those strongholds are built and established. And so I felt that as you were talking about, there are true principalities that we've allowed to literally just move into these spaces and get comfortable in these spaces because we've been silent in these spaces. And the truth is, I don't know how much we confront these. I don't think that the principalities are bothered by our services. We need our services, right? But if we're really going to advance the kingdom, then we have to be able to confront these spaces, and there's these vacuums. And so what I hear Glenn saying is that there's these two major areas that the Lord is going to call the church to bring truth to. That we have to be willing to release the voice of the Lord into these spaces. We are the pillar of truth in the earth. And I think there's two things that are needed. We need to be a voice of truth in these areas. So therefore, we need truth, and we need understanding, and we need revelation. It's not enough for us not to understand what's going on. It's not enough for us to not study and to understand what is happening in our culture. But not only do we need truth, we need demonstration. And I believe that the Spirit of God is going to empower us to do both, to be a voice of truth and a pillar of truth, but also that as we are bringing truth, that we are representing a model and a demonstration, really representing a solution of what the White House is trying to figure out. And so it's going to be both of those things simultaneously. So I don't know if we want to take time to just lean into those two major areas and just talk about, when we talk about racial healing, we talk about, these are not easy areas because no generation has figured it out yet. So we have inherited a generational problem that no one has figured out before us. We need the help of the Lord, but we need wisdom, we need strategy, we need understanding. Where do we start? What does it look like? We talk about the sexually broken. What do we need to begin to do in our churches? What shifts need to happen? Because I think that there's sometimes a differentiation between our theology and our functionality. And I really do believe that the Lord in this time is bringing the two together, right? That he's causing us to begin to walk and function in what we truly believe and matching those two together. So in terms of racial healing and racial reconciliation and unity, where are we right now? What do you sense happening right now? What do we need to be attentive to? Where can we start? Because there's so many different demographics in the room, so many different regions in the room. There's that tension because we're not trying to make anything happen. But I think your statement of reconciliation is what he does in our heart, and multi-ethnic is not something we create. It really is the fruit, or it is something that he blesses us with. But what is it? We're walking. Maybe we can share a little bit from our journey here. But for those that are in different demographics, is there a central thing that we can begin to do? Is it just prayer? What are you sensing?
You know, I think to a large degree, we're not okay. We're not sure if it's okay to talk about it. Come on. Because I'm not sure if I'm going to say the right thing. You know, and I think on the whites side, it's like, can I have a tenderness to listen? And I started using the word tenderness because whites understand that. You know, I forget what the other word was they didn't like. I forget what it was, but it's like, you know, if I said to them, can you be tender, at least in here? Yeah, I can do that. But I don't have privilege. You know, no, can you just be tender? Can you just listen? Because that's coming out of something. You know, that's coming out of a wound somewhere. And so there are certain terms we're trying to stay away from because we don't know what triggers. You know, white privilege is one that triggers, you know. What do you mean white privilege? I don't have white privilege, you know. And then the CRT. Oh, man, that's, you know, that. But don't even want to bring that up, you know, because it's created, it's from man's need, but man's way to deal with it rather than the heart of the gospel. Because if you go with one side, you're going to always be angry. If you go the other side, you're always going to be proud and separated. Do you know what I'm saying? If the whites go one side, they're not going to ever listen, but they're afraid they're going to be labeled as woke just to listen. I mean, my favorite black preacher, Jackie Hill Perry, was challenged and called woke because she made a statement that said every white person needs to look in their heart and know why they would look down on their black brother or sister or even think they're criminals. And she was labeled on a documentary as woke. And I can name you leader after leader across the United States that's dealing with the sexual issue that says, yes, we understand that there's tendencies from birth because of depravity. Just like there's many in this room right now, all of us have tendencies that are not godly. But the cross is where you left them. And you go there every day. And you walk it out every day. Right? And there are people now being attacked as woke because they're saying to the homosexual, we understand you have a same-sex attraction. You just have to lay it at the cross. I mean, Sam Albury, the guy that I think he's a Presbyterian pastor who struggled with same-sex attraction all of his life. And he says, but I can't go there. I'm not a homosexual. My identity is Christ. I lay it at the foot of the cross every day. It's the gospel. But for me to say I don't have same-sex attractions is not being honest. And so you got a group now calling him woke. Because they're afraid of this word orientation, because it's not the orientation, it's sin. You know, everybody in this room is orientated to sin without the cross. Right? But it's become a division. So you can't even talk. You know, we can't even talk. And we don't know what's okay to say. And so So this is really neat. We had a little meeting not too long ago, just to begin to talk about what's this merger like and what do it needs among us as racial. And one of the brothers came over to him, and he'd been in our city for 15 years. And he came over, and he's so precious, and he's standing there. He said, I didn't even know I had this wound in me. Yeah. But to hear them get to talk, I need to talk. I got to go home. I got to deal with this that's inside of me. Yeah. That's my brother. Yeah. But there's not been an environment where he could say, I really have been hurt. And I've got to release this. I've got to forgive this. I've got to go on. Because otherwise you'll get over here where it's always going to be this way and nobody's going to listen and nothing's going to ever change. And it becomes a perpetual issue. Somewhere we got to get healed. Somewhere we got to go on. Not ignoring. It'd be like sexual molestation. If you don't address that, and if people just overlook that, go, a lot of people have had that. You should be over that by now. Come on. You're not healing anybody. Right. Yeah. And on the other hand, if they become a perpetual victim and they never go for help, that's not the kingdom either. Yeah. That's really where we are with the races, aren't we? Yeah. There's two sides to it. So,
Glenn, I think even that the word woke, I'd take it back another step. You take the word woke, and I've been studied all the definitions of that, but it's become how do you say that? Pejorative word, like to make that word. Language is so important. So it evolves, and you take a word. I know it didn't mean that before, and now have made it mean something. And language is so powerful, and that's why I think it's so valuable to just have time around tables, because probably the worst two things you could call a white person today would be a racist and a pedophile. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so that's where there's a fear, I think, to talk. I might say the wrong thing. But if you're amongst brothers and sisters that you love and care for you, you can have conversations. You can have a safe place to ask questions. Even in our conversations that we've had quite a bit, myself, Glenn, and Kendrick, Kendrick obviously is offering a perspective that I wouldn't have, And it's eye-opening at times, you know what I'm saying, of someone's thought process, their mentality and something, and you're just blinded to it until the Holy Spirit shows it to you. I think that's where there's got to be a tenderness. I just talk for myself. There's got to be a tenderness in it. And my wife has helped me with this probably more than any other single person, and the Holy Spirit, of just, because even gender-wise, male and female, even just seeing things, and all of us, our husbands or wives, can identify with the fact that men and women do not think the same. You know what I'm saying? And communicating with each other. I mean, maybe y'all do. I don't know, but just communicating with each other.
And we never will.
And we never will.
That's why we need each other.
That's right.
We need to believe each other because we're never going to think the same.
Yes. And that is the beauty of it. But if you don't have the context of the relationship and the care for one another, then you are just going to keep talking past each other. We push people to the corners. Well, you believe this, so you must believe this, this, and this. Right. And we never get any traction because of that. So I think that's why I think the conversation is important, and just being tender and it being illuminated to us, because you have blatant racists, of course, you have people who are blatantly racist, but you got a lot of people who are just insensitive to things that you would say, and you don't have any idea that you have just really wounded this person. You've not met them where they were, you know what I mean? And just having your eyes open to even that, I'm certainly not arrived anywhere, but I thank the Lord I'm way more emotionally intelligent than I was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Again, my wife just helping me in that. Just know I have a real passion for truth, which I believe God put in me, but there's an element of the timing of that, how you say that. You know what I'm saying? And I just did not have the emotional intelligence to communicate that in a loving way and meet people just where they are, you know what I'm saying? And not to leave them there necessarily, but just the compassion for it. So,
Yeah, can't stress enough how crucial relationship is. It's in our separation, dysfunction is normalized. And it's not until we come together that it exposes what has been normal. And I would say, if I were to speak into the merge, that has been one of the major key elements for me is I did not realize, because what we try to do is we try to build unity separated, and it does not work. We try to get strategies, and we try to, and you can't become one separated. So the beauty of God's sovereignty amongst us, that we can't take any credit for because we did not choose it, nor would we have chosen it. And we can begin to get prideful and think that we did choose this. It was the Spirit of God. We did not choose this. In His sovereignty, He has, if I could use the word lightly, forced us to be together in a sense, because there really is no other way to really know our hearts. There is no other way to heal. But that has been the key component. Is I did not know how much dysfunction on the African American end. I'm going to tell you, I did not know I was wounded. I've always been the minority. My mother was she was married to a Caucasian. I had white stepbrothers that I grew up with. So I did not even know how much wound was there throughout the years until the Lord really brought us together. And we began to hit some racial issues that is normal for me in my life. But what was not normal is now I'm leaving this moment of pain, and instead of calling my brothers, you know what I mean? Right. Now all of a sudden, who do I call? I'm calling an apostolic father who's of the next generation and is Caucasian, and I'm for the first time sharing this pain with the other race. And that is what began to bring the healing. And Glenn took time to really meet with a handful of our guys. And I remember them calling me before meeting with Glenn saying, I'm terrified. Are you sure I can open up? And me, how much can I say, right? One of them literally, like in the parking lot, I don't think I can do this. That shows you how segregated we have been. That shows you how segregated we are in our thoughts and our thinking, our perspective. It shows you how new this is in 2023. And me having to assure you are getting ready to experience what you've never experienced. And we've hit some racial issues, but that is normal. We've always experienced that. What we have never experienced is experiencing it together. That is the new, and that is where the Lord is moving.
even that point, Kendrick, when we were talking about that before, it's like never crossed my mind till you said that. You know, the idea that there would be a fear to come and share, or I mean, I think that's an excellent point of white people talking to white people, black people talking to black people. You know what I mean? You just don't, you're not conscious of it. I thought that was a huge, when we were talking about that a while back, I thought that was a huge, and then in our meetings, I can't remember the term that was used, but normalized, there was something about being normalized that I thought was a constant theme. Yeah, maybe it was normalized dysfunction or something like that. But it was the idea that, again, as a Caucasian, we've not had to face some of that. So you don't even think about it. That's why it's, you know, it's to just be illuminated, you know, in our own heart, you know.
Tell them how Elizabeth helped you in going in the store. I think that.
Yeah, because I think that is, this story is revealing how much dysfunction has been normalized amongst blacks, and in my life in particular. I was living from a lens that was normal to me, and when it's normal to you, it doesn't hurt. Right. You normalize the pain of it. You normalize it becomes your reality, and the Lord has exposed through relationship because of the Caucasians on this end letting us know that these things are not okay. We can think that as blacks, but it's not until we hear that we're like, oh, it really isn't? Right? It really is it okay? And so an example of this would be we were in H&M, and the Lord used Elizabeth to bring me into an encounter retreat right there in line. But I was needing to return some items, and I can't remember. I did not have a receipt, number one. And I needed them to put it on a different card because I lost the card I purchased. Now, the black people are in the room are like, no, there ain't even, come on, Terrell, come on, Terrell, you know, hey, You know you ain't going.
And there's not a white person in here would even think about that.
So I'm in line,
know?
and I'm calling Elizabeth like, I'm like next up, and I don't have. I just realized I don't have, and she, I can't remember the exact words that she said. She says something like, "Don't put that on yourself." Yeah. I said, wait a minute. I've been putting that on myself the entirety of my life. Yes. I did not know how. I mean, I could not leave my house with my do-rag on. Yeah. One time I was walking around the block and forgot it on. Oh Lord, took that, I did not, that is the reality that we live in, but in relationship, the Lord bringing us together, it's amazing how much healing is happening because the Lord is exposing dysfunction on both ends. On the Caucasian end, they're saying, wait a minute, I did not know that mindset was in me. I did not know that perspective was in me. And that is the beauty of it.
Well, when you told that story to me and Glenn, you asked us, would y'all have thought about that? And we were like, not for a second. We just walked up and said, give me my money back. You know what I'm saying? Like, that would be an example.
Let me see your manager.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
But listen, we're getting some healing. We're going to stop putting that on ourselves because we have a community of people saying we don't have to put that on ourselves anymore. So it's beautiful. Maybe can we take a couple of minutes? You have
Is this only an Oklahoma thing, or is this?
Yeah, let us know. Is this everywhere?
Tennessee.
All right.
I know Tennessee's like us.
You can just mark the South for sure.
Yes.
California.
Well, to answer your question, so I was born in Louisiana, went to school in Arkansas, and been here in Oklahoma. So I know all three of those, they exist. So, but as you were talking, it really, really hit me. I didn't realize that there was layers to this because I thought I addressed it. And growing up in Louisiana is very secular. And so I grew up in the barbershop. But I had experienced both sides because I went to all black school, but I went to an all white church. And so I got to see the dichotomy. And my grandfather, I told somebody this week, I thank God for him. I got to, early this year, sit and talk to him and just hit record and hear him talking. And we sat there for an hour, and I stopped it, and I was talking to my boss last week, who's white, and I said, my grandfather has zero bitterness in his heart. Wow. Wow. And his best friends, he would say, are all white, and that's not supposed to happen in Louisiana. But I noticed that my parents, they didn't have bitterness in their heart, and that allowed me not to have bitterness in my heart. And my grandfather, I realized this week, and what shifted in me was when I realized I had some more layers, was when the guy in Memphis got killed. I was on a cruise, and it was the only thing on, and I consumed it. And it was the first time that I'd seen a black man die that had followed the rules. Because in my opinion, as long as I follow these rules, I'll be safe. And he had followed the rules, and he still died. And it did something inside of me, and something started to rise up. And I'm flying on the plane back, and I'm getting a hold of, believe it or not, God used economics. I'm reading economics, and they're talking about the heuristic principle, where it says the human mind, based on your rule of thumb, what you've experienced in your life is what you'll default to. And because of what I had seen, when situations like that, I began, my default wanted to rise up and say, that's you, you're next, Jeremy. That's going to happen to you. You're not safe. And I think that's what happens on both sides. We have our rules of thumb that says, no, I'm not racist, or no, this is going on, or no, this isn't going to happen. But then God hit me and said, what is your standard? because your imagination will lie to you. Whatever your rule of thumb and your imagination, that will become your standard that you will then judge from. And it hit me, and I said, no longer can I allow my rule of thumb or my experience to be my standard. God, I need you as the standard and my automatic default rule. And that takes a while to get worked out. That takes a while. We was telling Derek yesterday when I was playing ball in college, it took a while for me to not allow my athleticism, which had got me there, to not try to keep me there. And my coach said, your technique, your technique, your technique, your technique. It took me a year until my brain started relying on the technique instead of my athleticism. And I think about what happens. It's been a while until I continually to repeat for the standard of God, the standard of God, the standard of God, the standard of God to be my foundation. Rather than my imagination and my rule of thumb and my experiences. That is where healing will come from. Because it doesn't happen one time, it doesn't happen in one meeting, it doesn't happen in one conversation, but it's over and over and over and over. I can't tell you how many times that coach yelled at me, 6-inch step, 6-inch step. Stop leaping, because you have no base and you have no foundation. And so I as you were talking, those things, that passion for the truth that you spoke about, we will allow that passion to default those over into our imagination, which will let us allow our rules of thumb to guide us, rather than what you have said, God. What have you called me, and what have you said about me, not what society has told me. And so until those two are dealt with, and the repeating over and over and over until it comes out of me. One day, I don't know when it happened, but one day I stopped relying on what got me there, and I began to follow what my coach said. And I can't tell you when it happened, but I just know it happened.
Man, that's so good.
I don't want to take the direction here, but is there a way that we could take 10 minutes for you guys to dialogue at your tables? I feel like we're saying a lot here, but I wish we had all day. But what if you took 10 minutes at your tables? Let's say divide up in like groups of 6 right here. And what if you shared just what your hearing said? What you see a need is in your own area community. Could we do this?
Yeah, and I have 2 questions.
Oh,
actually,
do
that
you?
might
Okay.
help. Yeah, there's 2 questions that might actually help. One is,
Perfect.
What does it look like for your local church to engage culture in its region, sphere, and expression? Meaning expression, all of our expressions are different. But whatever your church expression is, the expression of the kingdom in the earth, that has a lot to do with where God is calling you to engage. And then the next question is also similar. What does it look like for you as a saint to engage culture
Perfect.
in your place, in your sphere?
Perfect.
So yeah, let's do that. Let's
Let's go back and forth. I just think it'd be great if we could have that time.